Hi, I'm Shanda. This trip was supposed to be about family, one last chance to feel like I belonged somewhere. But the moment we arrived, my name wasn't on the reservation, not on the welcome sign, not even on the room key. My mom looked at me and said, "Stop ruining the trip with your sister, just leave." So I did, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I left a bag, a quiet one, with receipts, bank records, even a video they thought I deleted. They thought I was the problem. So why are they the ones scrambling now? You ever wonder what happens when the family you built your life around suddenly realizes you were holding the foundation all along? Yeah, me too. Want to see what they found when I walked out? I came home later than usual that Thursday. Traffic on the 17 had been backed up for miles, and my last Zoom call dragged past 6, as usual. The front porch light was already on when I pulled into the driveway, and I could hear laughter from inside before I even unlocked the door. I walked in with the usual nod toward the living room, not expecting a reply. They were all seated at the long oak table, the one that had seen every Thanksgiving and most arguments since Dad left. Darlene, my mother, had her reading glasses on and was flipping through printed itineraries. Gypsy was halfway through a glass of Chardonnay, and Uncle Hal was doing what he always did best, watching in silence. Nobody turned their head when I closed the door behind me. I dropped my bag next to the shoe rack, hung up my jacket, and walked toward them. "There she is," Darlene finally said without looking up. "We were just finalizing the plan. Gypsy will lead the itinerary. She's better at organizing." It was said like a line rehearsed long ago, one I wasn't supposed to take personally. But there was something about the way she said gypsy and organizing in the same breath, like the two were synonymous. I didn't sit. I hovered, one hand still resting on the back of a chair. "You already decided everything?" I asked lightly. I didn't want to start something, not yet. Gypsy looked up, all sweet smiles and casual dismissals. "Don't worry, Shan, we'll fill you in." She poured herself another half glass like she hadn't just erased me from my own vacation. I waited a beat longer, then took a seat across from Uncle Hal. He nodded once, almost apologetically. But that was the extent of it. No one asked what I'd eaten that day, how work was going, or why my voice was hoarse from presenting for 3 hours straight. Darlene moved on to dinner reservations at the resort. "Let's not make them too fancy. Venus doesn't like fussy food." Venus, not Gypsy. That was her baby name. The name she allowed only family to use. The name I hadn't heard Darlene call me since I was 12. I forced a smile. "Sounds good." Later that night, after they had gone back to the den to rewatch some old Hallmark movie and I was left alone in the dining room, I skimmed through the stack of printed documents left on the table. Resort confirmations, dinner bookings, spa schedules. My eyes caught the passenger list. I ran my finger down the column of names. Darlene Carter, Venus Carter, and at the bottom, Plaus one guest. No surname, no initials. I flipped to the hotel room assignment. Room 304, Darlene and Venus. Room 405, storage overflow. Nothing for me. I took a breath, slow and steady, before walking to the kitchen for water. On my way, I paused at the corkboard by the fridge, where we always posted trips and menus and school calendars growing up. They'd pinned a seating chart mock-up for the first night's welcome dinner. A rectangular table, sketched in ink. 2 names carefully written at the head. Darlene and Venus. No third name. No chair marked for me. I stood there for a while, letting the cool hum of the refrigerator mask the tightness in my chest. I wasn't crying. I hadn't cried over this kind of thing in years. Not since I was old enough to realize that when you're not remembered, it's because someone decided you weren't worth remembering. I took my phone out and snapped a photo of the chart. Not to send, not to shame, just to have. Then I turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, my footsteps barely making a sound. Funny, no room for me at the table, even on paper. The next afternoon, we pulled into the circular driveway of the resort, just outside Scottsdale. It was warm enough to make the air feel heavy, but not quite hot enough to complain out loud. I hadn't spoken much on the drive. Neither had Gypsy, though she managed to hum along to the radio when Darlene played her road trip mix, which hadn't changed since I was in high school. As soon as we stepped out of the SUV, a valet greeted us with a clipboard and white gloves. Darlene immediately lit up. Gypsy adjusted her sunglasses like someone arriving at a press conference, and I reached into the trunk to grab my own bag. Inside the lobby, cool air hummed through overhead vents, and a young woman at the check-in desk smiled with that polished, overly careful customer service smile. "Welcome to Sonoran Winds Resort, Mrs. Carter," she said. "And Miss Venus, we've prepared your welcome packets." She handed over 2 navy blue envelopes. Darlene turned slightly toward me. "She's with us, too," she said, almost as an afterthought. The clerk blinked, then reached under the desk. "Oh, yes. There was one more. Here you go, Miss Guest?" She offered me a white envelope. My name wasn't printed on it. It just said, "Guest of Carter Party, no ID on file." I took it without saying anything. Inside was the same brochure, same dinner schedule, same spa offers. Just not my name, not even a placeholder. My name was in lowercase, like an accident. "Must have been a system glitch," Gypsy muttered, not looking up from her phone. "Don't make this into a thing." I didn't, not out loud. The 3 of us followed a bellhop through terracotta-tiled halls to our villa. Technically a 3-bedroom suite, though Gypsy had already claimed the room with the terrace, and Darlene insisted on the one with the whirlpool tub. That left me with the one next to the laundry closet. Once we dropped off our bags, Gypsy asked, "Should we check the pool?" She wasn't really asking me. We walked out together, though we might as well have been on separate vacations. By the time we reached the pool deck, Gypsy was already complaining. "This isn't what the pictures looked like. Our chairs are facing the back wall. I specifically said I wanted a view." Darlene waved down a pool attendant and began a breathy monologue about travel agent mistakes and expectations. I leaned toward her quietly. "It's probably just a mix-up. Maybe we can rotate." Before I could finish, she turned sharply. "Let your sister settle down. You always make things bigger than they are." My mouth stayed half open, suspended in that tiny moment where I had to choose between defending myself or doing what I'd always done, folding. I took a step back and folded. They ordered margaritas. I asked for iced tea. No one noticed. Later, while waiting in the lobby for our dinner reservations to be confirmed, I wandered toward the front display, a large flat screen with a slideshow looping family welcomes, anniversaries, bridal showers. Then I saw it. "Welcome, Darlene and family. Gypsy, Jonathan." The screen flashed to a photo I hadn't seen in years. One of those staged Christmas photos Darlene had framed on the wall. Gypsy front and center. Darlene in her favorite red scarf. Me? Cropped at the edge. Only the corner of my shoulder remained. I knew the original photo. I remembered standing there, holding the dog, smiling even though I had a cold that day. But here, now, I was background noise. A tree. A blur. I lifted my phone, took a quiet picture of the screen, and put it away. No one noticed that either. Dinner was average. I pushed food around my plate while Darlene praised the resort steak as surprisingly tender. Gypsy talked about Jonathan, her on-again, off-again boyfriend who might show up if his schedule clears. I made the usual polite noises, the kinds of filler responses that patch over silence without ever engaging the wound. When we got back to the villa, Darlene yawned. "Early spa tomorrow. You girls behave." Gypsy retreated to her room without another word. I stayed in the common area for a few minutes, watching the lights fade outside. That's when it hit me. For years, I had been playing the role of the apologizer, the peacemaker, the one who made it easier for them to pretend we were a family that functioned. They didn't ask me to leave. They just never invited me to stay. I stood up, grabbed a pen from the side table, and flipped over my welcome packet. On the back, I wrote 3 words I had no plan for, no timeline, just a truth, not part of. Then, I tore the paper in half and left it under my water glass. When people exclude you gently, you learn to politely disappear. The sky had dimmed to that coppery blue it always gets in the Arizona desert, before slipping into full darkness. I stepped outside for just a minute after leaving the paper under my glass, letting the dry air sting my throat before heading back in. I needed the quiet, even if it only lasted 30 seconds. By the time we walked down to the resort's patio restaurant for dinner, I had tucked whatever resentment I carried back into its usual place, behind my ribs, just under the part that remembers to smile. The hostess showed us to a table near the far end, close to the fire pit. It wasn't the nicest spot, but it had a view. Gypsy didn't like the chairs. "These feel like they were made for toddlers," she mumbled, as she shifted uncomfortably. "Do they not believe in lumbar support here?" Darlene waved over a waiter and gestured toward Gypsy's chair with exaggerated concern. "She has back issues," she whispered, as if Gypsy were royalty with a medical file. "It's a recurring thing, ever since her Pilates instructor pushed her too hard." The waiter gave a tight smile, nodded, and vanished inside. As soon as he was out of earshot, Gypsy picked up her menu and sighed. "I already know I'm gonna hate this place. I mean, if you want to try a different restaurant," I started. Darlene cut in, sharp and immediate. "You should have just let her be. You always have to needle her." The word landed heavier than it should have. Needle. As if I'd poked at her out of spite. As if my suggestion wasn't an attempt to help, but a calculated move to cause irritation. I looked down at my salad. I hadn't touched it. The greens were starting to wilt under the dressing, the edges curling in on themselves. Gypsy eventually pushed her plate away, muttered something about needing air, and stormed off. Darlene sighed heavily. "This is what I meant. She's fragile right now. It doesn't take much." "Right," I said quietly. "Guess I'm always the trigger." Darlene didn't answer. She flagged down the waiter to ask about dessert. After dinner, we walked back toward the villa. The resort path was lit with subtle ground lights, spaced just far enough apart to make the shadows stretch long between them. Gypsy walked ahead with Darlene, just out of earshot but not out of range. "I swear," Gypsy said, not bothering to lower her voice. "She's just a little storm that never passes." They both laughed. A short, mean kind of laugh that people think you can't hear if you're behind them. I stopped walking for a second. Not because the comment surprised me, it didn't, but because hearing it so casually confirmed something I'd suspected for years. They had a name for me. Not Shanda. Not even a version of my name. Just a title. A label. I didn't respond. I just kept walking after a pause, dragging my feet a little on the gravel path so they wouldn't hear how steady my breathing was. Back inside the villa, everyone settled in like nothing had happened. Darlene went to her room to rest her eyes, which always meant phone calls with cousins we never see. Gypsy kicked off her shoes and curled up in the middle of the couch, flipping through TV channels. I lingered for a while, unsure where to sit. The love seat had a throw blanket folded neatly on it, Gypsy's. Darlene had claimed the recliner earlier that morning. I grabbed the folding chair from the corner and set it near the balcony door, the only spot left. Technically, no one had claimed it, but that was the point. "You good over there?" Gypsy asked, without looking away from the screen. "Yep," I replied. "Perfect view of the plants." She laughed once. That hollow, practiced laugh she used when she didn't care what I said. I sat there for a few minutes, pretending to watch the news with them, before I got up and headed to my room. It wasn't late, but my body felt heavy, like my bones were quietly trying to excuse themselves. Once in bed, I didn't sleep. I lay on my side, staring at the slats of light spilling in through the half-closed blinds. My mind wasn't replaying what they'd said. It was cataloging. Not out of bitterness, not out of shock. Just for clarity. No name on the welcome packet, no photo on the screen, no seat at the dinner chart, no voice in the conversations, no defense. even when blamed. I wasn't taking notes to remember. I was taking notes to make sure I'd never forget again. By the time the sun was fully up, the patio outside our villa was already buzzing with distant laughter and pool splashes. I stayed in bed longer than usual that morning, not because I was tired, but because I needed to calculate how much of myself I was willing to lose today. Around 10, I made my way down to the front desk. I told them I needed a replacement room key. I'd left mine somewhere, probably by the balcony table after last night's conversation with no one. The young woman behind the counter smiled politely, then typed something into the system. Her brows furrowed. "I'm sorry. It says here that only Darlene Carter and Venus Carter are authorized on the room." I tilted my head. "That's strange. I've been staying with them." Another few keystrokes. "There's a note that says, 'No third guest listed on confirmation. You're listed here.'" She turned the screen briefly. "As guest of Venus Carter. No photo ID on file." I didn't respond right away. I let her words hang in the air long enough to hear the silence behind them, the kind that gets louder the longer no one says anything. Then I smiled. Not the kind you give to show you're fine, but the kind you use when you've moved past pretending to be surprised. "No problem," I said. "I won't need a new key after all." She blinked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." I walked out of the lobby and back toward the resort's garden cafe. Gypsy was already there, lounging under one of the canopies, mimosa in hand, a pair of oversized sunglasses pushed to the bridge of her nose. Darlene sat across from her, leafing through a brochure like she was researching a second home. "I tried that citrus body wrap last time," Darlene said, "but it left me itchy. I think I'll do the sea mud this time, purifying, cleansing." Gypsy chuckled. "You and your mud baths." I pulled out a chair but didn't sit. Darlene looked up, just briefly. "Did you sleep okay?" "Fine." She went right back to her pamphlet. And then, unprompted, in the same casual voice she might have used to comment on the weather, she said, "You know, Venus was born in the spring. Everything was blooming. Even the neighbors brought over a pie. You came that winter when everything was falling apart, during the divorce. It was hard to remember the joy." Gypsy didn't react, just took another sip of her drink. I didn't move. Darlene turned a page. "It's not your fault, of course. Timing is everything." That sentence stayed with me all the way through lunch, past the walk back to the villa, and well into the afternoon, when I sat alone on the balcony, watching palm fronds sway against a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to be cloudy or clear. The air was dry, but it still held that hint of chlorine and sunscreen, summertime smells I used to associate with long drives and bad radio stations. Now it just reminded me of spaces I didn't belong in, even when I was physically present. I thought back to something I hadn't allowed myself to revisit in years. It was 8 years ago. I had just moved to Seattle for a job that ended up falling through the week I arrived. I didn't call home. I didn't ask for help. I slept on an air mattress for 4 weeks while working 2 part-time jobs and somehow still managed to make rent. I remember one night eating oatmeal 3 times in a row and thinking, no one knows I exist right now. And weirdly, that thought didn't crush me. It freed me. I wasn't helpless then. I'm not helpless now. Inside the villa, Gypsy's voice rose. She was on the phone, probably Jonathan again. The words were muffled, but the tone carried the same manufactured crisis I'd heard since we were kids. Darlene laughed at something in response. Like old times, like nothing was broken. I stood up from the balcony and walked back into my room. Pulled out my phone, opened a travel app, booked a return flight, just like that. Departure, Sunday night. 1 seat. Direct. I didn't pack. Not yet. But I'd stopped wondering whether I was being dramatic. I'd stopped asking if I was the one making things bigger than they were. The answer was simpler now. They made the house. They picked the seats. They drew the lines. And all I did was finally step outside of them. The door didn't need to slam for me to know I'd already walked out. The sun was slipping behind the mountains by the time I made it back from the garden path. Dinner had ended awkwardly again. Gypsy left the table early after making a scene over her wine being too warm, and Darlene blamed the whole thing on the energy I bring into rooms. I didn't respond then. I had already started choosing which battles weren't worth another bruise. Back at the villa, the air was too still. Even the ceiling fan above the patio made more sound than the people I'd spent the week pretending were my family. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the patio, holding a half-empty glass of water, listening to Darlene muttering from the sofa. Her voice always shifted just slightly when she thought I wasn't listening, tilted toward performance. "She's always so tense," she said to Gypsy, who sat cross-legged on the arm of the couch scrolling her phone. "It's like she's allergic to joy," Gypsy chuckled. "It's because she doesn't know how to relax. She thinks being uncomfortable makes her more important." I didn't interrupt. I put my glass in the sink and walked past them, back into the hallway. "Hey!" Darlene called out, suddenly louder. "You're not gonna throw a fit, are you?" I stopped. Not because I was going to throw anything, but because I realized they needed me to. That was the part I'd been playing for years, quiet until provoked, then defensive enough to make them feel like victims. So I turned around and leaned slightly against the archway, calm and clear. "What exactly am I supposed to be throwing a fit over?" Darlene scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was being unreasonable for asking a reasonable question. "Gypsy's already upset. She came here to relax, not to walk on eggshells." I glanced at Gypsy. Her face didn't flinch. She just kept scrolling. "You've been sulking this whole time," Darlene went on. "Honestly, maybe you should just go home if you can't enjoy yourself like the rest of us." There it was, laid out as neat as a place setting. I straightened up. Fine. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. I walked into my room, unplugged my phone from the charger, slipped it into my pocket. I grabbed my wallet and car key, then hesitated only a second before unzipping the small duffel bag I'd carried in 2 days ago. I pulled out the folder I'd packed, but never unpacked. Inside were copies of financial records, house deeds, insurance documents, things no one ever asked about because no one ever thought they'd be important. I didn't bring my full suitcase. That was intentional. Let them stare at it in the corner for a few hours, or days, before they realized I hadn't forgotten it. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. I stepped off the porch and into the gravel path that led toward the main lobby. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the sliding glass door open behind me. "Shanda, where are you going?" Darlene's voice followed me like a mosquito. "To get some air," I said without turning. "That's not what this is about," she barked. "You're being dramatic again." But I wasn't. I was done. I made it to the resort's curb just as a black sedan pulled up, called from the app a half hour earlier, when I'd booked the return flight. The driver greeted me by name, asked if I had bags. "Just this," I said, lifting the duffel. As we pulled away, I glanced back toward the villa. Through the window, I could still see Darlene's silhouette pacing. Gypsy was sitting on the couch, holding her phone up like a mirror. They were still talking, probably about me, still filling the room with explanations and assumptions and justifications. All of it swirling in a loop that didn't include me anymore. That was the part they hadn't grasped yet. They thought the control was in the volume. The louder one wins. But silence, when it's chosen, is heavier than shouting. And I had already chosen it. They wouldn't notice what I left behind until they needed it. The passwords, the card on file, the name on the lease. The folder zipped inside the suitcase, sitting quietly by the TV stand. They wouldn't know what's missing until it's too late. The next morning crept in slow and hazy. Scottsdale air always seemed gentler on Sundays, as if the desert itself took a break from the heat. But inside the villa, nothing felt light. Gypsy was the first to find the bag. I wasn't there to watch her unzip it, but I could picture it. Her painted nails hesitating over the zipper, not out of fear, but that spoiled uncertainty she always wore when touching something she hadn't been told was hers. "Did she really just leave this?" she asked. Darlene barely looked up from her coffee. "She'll come crawling back. She always does." But when Gypsy pulled out the folder tucked neatly inside, her breath caught. That sound, I imagined, was the first honest inhale she'd taken in years. The sound of someone recognizing a threat written in ink. Receipts, bank statements, screenshots. Not pages of rage or accusations, just quiet evidence. Printed copies of charges made on a credit card she never realized was mine. The airline bookings, the resort reservations, spa packages, even the overpriced brunch Darlene insisted we all pretend to enjoy. And then there were the messages. Printed out, not just stored digitally. Pages and pages of text threads between Gypsy and someone named Jason. "Don't worry," Jason had written. "Your sister's rich. She doesn't even notice this stuff." Another message. "She won't cut you off. She's too proud." One more. "Just keep blaming stress. She's always been the weird one." At the bottom of the stack sat a screenshot. A single message from Darlene to Gypsy, dated 4 months prior. "We'll keep her quiet like always." For the first time in years, I think they both went silent. Later that morning, Darlene picked up the resort phone to try and book another spa session. She always did that after something shook her. Find comfort in steam and cucumber water. But the card didn't go through. She tried again, then again. Each time, the same tone echoed back from the desk staff. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This card is inactive." That's when she looked at Gypsy. "Whose card did we use for this trip?" Gypsy blinked. I thought it was the travel agent's." Darlene narrowed her eyes. "What travel agent?" The phone went quiet in her hand. The paper stack still sat on the counter, refusing to burn even under their stares. "I don't get it," Gypsy said finally. "Why would she keep all this?" Darlene didn't answer right away. She just walked over to the kitchen counter and sat down slowly, like the floor had shifted under her feet. "Because," she muttered, "she always knew we'd pretend she didn't matter." That answer hit harder than either of them wanted to admit. Backtracking came fast after that. Gypsy opened her phone and started deleting messages. Some she hadn't even read twice before. But the damage was already done. Some of those messages weren't just screenshots. Some had been printed, time-stamped, forwarded to backup email addresses. They weren't just secrets anymore. They were history. Their words, preserved not as weapons, but as witness. Outside the villa, the sun climbed high. They stayed inside. And me? I watched from a different place entirely, not hidden, just away. Across town, at a quiet Airbnb with a balcony view and no need to explain why I'd left. From there, I pictured them moving through the silence like people in a museum, stepping around exhibits they didn't want to admit they created. I'd left them paper cuts, small truths sharp enough to bleed slowly, and paper cuts hurt more when no one knows how to stop the bleeding. The following day began like any other checkout morning, quiet, tense, and heavy with unspoken things. But this time, I wasn't the one feeling it. Across town, I sat on the balcony of a modest Airbnb in Sedona. I sipped tea out of a chipped mug while watching a hummingbird hover near a potted lavender plant. No noise, no backtalk, no walking on conversational landmines, just stillness. It was strange how quickly peace becomes addictive. Back at the villa, the unraveling had begun. Darlene had woken up irritated. The coffee machine blinked, "Clean me," in passive-aggressive rebellion, and Gypsy couldn't find her sunglasses. Petty inconveniences they would have normally tossed my way like crumbs, but I wasn't there to catch them this time. They tried calling me around 9:15 a.m. "Straight to voicemail," Gypsy muttered, checking her phone again. Darlene snorted, still in her robe. "She's just being dramatic. She wants us to worry." "She's not that calculated," Gypsy said, less certain than she sounded. Another try. Message delivered. The screen read, but it sat there, unread. Darlene eventually called the front desk. "Can you confirm whether Ms. Shanda A. is still checked in?" A pause. The receptionist answered plainly, "She checked out early this morning, ma'am. No forwarding request." That was the moment the atmosphere shifted. "Where did she go?" Gypsy asked, staring down at her screen like it would start offering clues. Darlene didn't answer. She walked over to the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again without grabbing anything. Then came the second blow. She pulled up her phone to schedule a massage for noon, a last-ditch attempt to reset her nerves. As she entered her credit card number, the app blinked back a red error. "Payment declined." She tried again. Another card. Same result. She called the front desk again, this time with less composure. "There must be a problem with your system. My reservation was secured under Carter Family Billing." The reply was colder than she expected. "Billing was tied to a corporate business card ending in 3017. Authorization has been revoked." "That's Shanda's card," Gypsy said under her breath. Darlene froze. "No, that can't be right. That account was for family travel." Gypsy didn't look up. "It was never ours. It was hers. I told her I'd reimburse." Darlene's voice cracked mid-sentence, a rare glitch in her controlled register. It was just enough of a tremble to expose the fear crawling in. Still, the full weight didn't land until she picked up the landline and called her lawyer. "I just need a quick verification," she said. "It's about the house." A pause on the other end. "Ma'am, the deed is under Ms. Shanda A's name. You are listed as a tenant only." Silence. You could hear it settle like fog in a cold room. "No," she said slowly. "That can't be right. That house was gifted to me." "Not legally," the attorney replied. "Would you like us to email you the scanned documents?" "But I raised her." It wasn't an argument. It was a gasp, a plea tossed into an empty hallway and left unanswered. In Sedona, I sat back in my chair, letting the breeze hit my face. I wasn't spying, but let's just say that when people leave their digital tracks wide open, you don't have to look hard to see the footprints. Darlene had built a small kingdom of control, rules hidden inside favors, dependence disguised as generosity. But I had stopped signing her illusion years ago. The power she thought was hers was only on loan, and I had quietly decided not to renew the contract. Across 2 towns and a lifetime's worth of silence, I could picture Gypsy pacing, trying to explain to her credit card company why a payment bounced. I could see Darlene frantically tapping through old emails, looking for proof of an ownership that never belonged to her. No yelling, no confrontation, just quiet reversals. When you've been invisible for long enough, disappearing feels like a superpower. I didn't leave in a rage. I didn't write a manifesto. I didn't take anything that wasn't already mine. But I took back the only thing that had ever mattered to them: control. Turns out I didn't need to be there to win. The last morning at the resort didn't begin with shouting, but with silence. That heavy kind. The kind that fills a room when people have nothing left to spin. I arrived at the hotel conference room just before 9 a.m., a short walk from the main lobby, tucked between 2 oversized water features that gurgled with fake tranquility. The hotel manager greeted me at the door, politely, but without small talk. He knew this wasn't about spa credits or misplaced luggage. Inside, the room was already arranged. A U-shaped table, water pitchers, notepads that no one would use. Darlene sat with her arms crossed tight against her chest. Her blazer looked stiffer than usual. Gypsy was next to her, tapping the edge of her phone against her thigh. The hotel GM stood near the back wall, awkward but neutral. I walked in with my attorney, a woman named Rena. Calm, sharp. Her energy was like a scalpel, quiet until needed. No one said hello. I placed my folder on the table and stayed standing. "I asked for a room," I said plainly. "Not permission." Darlene's jaw twitched. "You didn't need to go behind our backs." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" Rena stepped forward, opening her own file. "Let's keep this brief," she said. "We're here to clarify financial misrepresentation and property records. Ms. A is not seeking damages at this time, only legal clarity and enforcement." She laid out the documents one by one. First, a copy of the house deed. Darlene Carter is listed as resident. The property is solely owned by Shanda A. Next, statements showing Shanda's direct payments into the Carter family's household utilities and maintenance for the past 3 years. Each one logged and signed. Then came the resort booking receipts. Flights, spa packages, meals, all billed to a corporate card under Ms. A's name, Rena said. Darlene tried to interrupt. That's not the full story. Ma'am, Rena said firmly, please wait. Darlene leaned back, lips pressed so tight her lipstick cracked. Gypsy shifted uncomfortably in her chair, glancing toward the hotel manager like she hoped someone would save her. I didn't flinch. I pressed a small tablet onto the center of the table and tapped play. A video lit up the screen. Dated 3 years ago. Gypsy, sitting on my apartment floor, mascara smeared under her eyes, clutching a nearly empty wine glass. I messed up, Shan. I didn't think he'd really leave. I'm 2 months behind, and if I lose this place, her voice cracked. I just need one more chance. I was off camera in the video, but my voice was clear. I'll wire the rent tonight, but this is the last time. The video ended with me typing on my laptop. No one spoke. I didn't expect them to. This wasn't about starting a conversation. I stood still for a moment, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Then I looked straight at Darlene. I don't want apologies, I said. I want space. And I want silence to mean something now. Rena nodded to me. I picked up the tablet, slipped it back into my bag. We'll be in touch about the house by Wednesday. Gypsy opened her mouth, but I turned before she could speak. Some words don't need responses. Some people don't deserve the last word. As we stepped into the hallway, Rena leaned slightly toward me. They looked like they'd been hit by a truck. They were, I said. It just moved slow. I didn't glance back. Not even once. You won't have to wonder what happens next. I already wrote it. The air felt different in upstate New York. Crisper. More honest somehow. A week had passed since the resort confrontation, and I was back home, or rather, at the place I'd chosen to call home after too many years of living somewhere out of guilt. The house was smaller than Darlene's, older too. But it had a sunroom that caught the morning light just right, and a screened porch where you could hear crickets at night instead of constant disappointment. I unpacked slowly. 2 bags. That was all I brought back. No souvenirs. No leftover arguments. Just clothes, work documents, and the kind of silence I had earned. There were no family photos on the walls. Just art I liked. Quiet lines. Pieces that didn't shout. For the first time in a long time, I had rooms that didn't remind me who I used to be. That Monday morning, my phone buzzed. It was Rena. The transfer process is in motion, she said. They'll receive official notice today. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the kettle steam. They can't afford the taxes, Shanda, she added. I smiled faintly. They'll learn. We ended the call, and I sat at my desk with 2 plain envelopes. No return address, just handwriting, mine, that had finally stopped shaking. The first letter was to Darlene. You once told me I was born in the wrong season, that my timing ruined everything. Maybe it did. Maybe I did arrive during winter, when everything was falling apart. But that wasn't my fault. And it wasn't my burden to fix. You chose to forget me. I chose to remember myself. You won't be hearing from me again, not out of anger, but because I don't have anything left you can take. I sealed it. No signature. The second was for Gypsy. What I gave you, I gave without condition. I never kept score. Not until you made it clear I was just a tool in your version of survival. What you took, you can keep. But the access ends here. Your debts are yours now. I won't pretend otherwise anymore. That one I signed. Just my first name. Nothing more. Later that afternoon, I walked to the mailbox down the street. The wind had picked up. Leaves were doing that dance where they never quite land. I dropped the letters in and stood there for a moment, not because I doubted it, but because I knew that was the real goodbye. There was no funeral for the version of me they used to know, no eulogy, just a quiet burial of an identity I'd outgrown. Back inside, I made tea. The old way, no rushing, no distractions, just water, heat, and stillness. This isn't about revenge. It never was. It's about recognition, about finding out who I am when no one's asking me to play a role, when there's no list to check, no guilt trips to respond to, no performance to uphold. Some people would call it healing. I just call it choosing myself. Some endings don't explode. They just stop. And thank God for that. Hello. My name is Vinitra, and my parents didn't even notice when I moved 3 states away. Not a call, not a question, nothing. They posted a family photo that week with the caption, "All of us together," and I wasn't in it. But that was just the surface. They sold off the land my grandmother left me, forged signatures, took out loans in my name, then called me, asking for help, like I owed them something. They thought I was still the quiet one, the good daughter, the shadow. But what happens when the shadow learns how to own the light? Would you stay silent? Or would you build something they couldn't ignore? Let me tell you what I did. I stood in front of the house with my hand halfway to the doorbell, wondering if the wood beneath the porch had always creaked that way, or if time had finally caught up to it. The paint was still chipped on the right side of the windowsill, the mailbox still tilted slightly to the left, but it didn't feel like mine anymore, or maybe it never had. I caught my reflection in the car window behind me. The woman staring back wore confidence like a coat, zipped to the neck, clean, composed. But under that, my fingers trembled just enough to betray me. I steadied my breath and rang the bell. The door opened slower than I remembered. Then came a face I once memorized without effort, my mother's. Her eyes scanned me like I was a saleswoman she didn't want to buy from. A beat passed. Then 2. "Sorry," she said, brushing a loose strand of gray behind her ear. "Who are you here to see?" It took me a second to answer, because I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that she didn't recognize me, or the fact that she sounded completely genuine. "It's me," I said. "Vinitra." Her mouth parted just slightly. A moment of calculation flickered behind her eyes. Then the awkward, rehearsed kind of smile that people give to avoid admitting they're caught. Oh, right. "Of course," she murmured, but she didn't move to hug me, didn't even open the door all the way. I stepped in on my own. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and thyme. The hallway hadn't changed, but everything else had. The living room was rearranged. The couch was new. On the wall where my graduation photo used to hang was a framed print of my brother Darnell standing beside a city councilman, shaking hands like he had just solved world hunger. Above the mantel was a recent family photo. Everyone was there. Darnell, our sister, their spouses, a couple of cousins, even the dog. Not me. I walked into what used to be my bedroom. The walls were a pale beige now. My posters were gone. My bookshelf, the one my uncle built me when I was 10, replaced by a printer and filing cabinet. The room had been turned into a home office, efficient, quiet, and utterly indifferent. Later that evening, I checked into a modest motel on the edge of town. Lorraine had said there was no room left. "The house is full," she claimed, like it was a hotel she didn't manage. After a lukewarm shower and dinner from a vending machine, I lay on the bed and opened my phone. Scrolling felt like a habit I couldn't quit. That's when I saw it. A Facebook post from my sister. "Happy birthday, Mom. So lucky to have all of us here. Family complete." I stared at it for a long moment, waiting to feel something sharp, anger, hurt, anything. But all I felt was the weight of confirmation. I laughed, not loudly. The kind of laugh that barely escapes your nose. The kind of laugh you use when something is too cruel to cry over, but too familiar to fight. 18 months ago, I left this place, packed my bags, moved 3 states away, and never once got a call asking where I'd gone. I had convinced myself it was my silence that kept them distant. But the truth? They never noticed I was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The motel room clock blinked through the hours, but my eyes stayed open, trained on the ceiling. My mind wasn't spinning. It had settled. Still, something in me itched for answers I already knew. Just past sunrise, I got out of bed, pulled on a sweater, and sat on the floor with the duffel bag I hadn't unpacked. From the side pocket, I pulled out a small plastic sleeve. Inside were a few folded receipts and a greeting card with a sun-bleached cover, roses and gold script. To the woman who gave me life. I stared at the florist confirmation slip. 2 years ago, sent to this same address. The card had been written in my hand. To Mom. Thank you for everything you did when I didn't know how to say it. Love, V. The flowers were expensive. Back then, I'd just gotten my first major deal in Houston. I wanted to mark the moment with gratitude, even if no one asked for it, even if no one would say thanks back. Except they did. Just not to me. I remembered the post, clear as day. Thanks for the beautiful bouquet, sweetheart. You always know how to make me feel special. Love you, baby girl. Posted by my mother, tagged to my sister, captioned, From your favorite daughter. That day, I told myself it didn't matter, that she must have mixed them up. Maybe it was the delivery, maybe the florist got confused. But even then, part of me knew better. Now, sitting on a stained motel carpet, card still sealed in its original envelope, I knew exactly what had happened. She knew where those flowers came from. She just decided who they should have come from. Later that morning, after some dry motel toast and 2 cups of bitter coffee, I drove back to the house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need permission. Nobody noticed when I was gone. Why would they care if I showed up? The driveway was empty. Good. Darnell's truck wasn't there. I pulled up quietly, parked behind the shed, and walked around to the garage. The side door was still sticky on the hinge, same as always. I jimmied it open, careful not to make too much noise. The garage hadn't changed. Dust thick enough to write your name in, the smell of old paint and rust. I wasn't there to look around. I had a purpose. In the far back corner was a stack of storage boxes. I recognized the handwriting on the labels. One read, Venitra, school stuff. I crouched and pulled it down, brushing away a dead spider from the corner. Inside were binders, notebooks, my high school yearbook. And beneath those, neatly placed in a manila envelope, was the letter. I knew it before I even opened the flap. The envelope was sealed, but warped. The edges were crumpled, the bottom corner chewed at, like it had been dragged around. Bits of dog hair clung to the paper. There were smudges, spots. It had clearly been shoved somewhere dirty, and it hadn't been opened. My handwriting was still on the front. For Mom, please read. I didn't open it either. I didn't need to. She never read it, never wanted to. She'd taken something I wrote in one of the hardest moments of my life, when I had just left college after a breakdown, when I was struggling to forgive her for the way she'd looked at me like I was disposable, and used it as lining for the dog bed. Probably thought it was trash. I stood up slowly, holding the letter in my hand. Then I placed it back inside the box, on top this time. Message received. I walked out without touching anything else. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead of heading back to the motel, I drove into town. There was a small cafe near the courthouse, the kind with sun-faded menus and chipped mugs. I ordered black coffee and a breakfast sandwich, then pulled out my laptop. I checked my calendar, my inbox, and opened a folder labeled Mid-South Acquisitions. Inside was the pending purchase file for several rural homes nearing foreclosure. One address caught my eye. My old house, the one I just walked out of. The final stage of acquisition was in 5 days. I stared at the file for a moment. There were no bells ringing in my head, no alarms, just a strange stillness. I didn't mark it for removal, didn't make any notes. I flagged it as internal interest, sensitive ownership confirmation pending, and closed the laptop. Then I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and leaned back in my chair. Let them keep thinking I came back because I missed them. Let them believe they still had control over what I knew, what I owned, what I wanted. Because truth was, they never saw me coming either. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had already made peace with what I wasn't going to hear. I didn't expect apologies. I didn't want explanations. I just needed to see it with my own eyes, to prove to myself that what I'd been avoiding all these years wasn't a misunderstanding. It was policy. I pulled into the driveway 5 minutes late on purpose. The family brunch was in full swing. Through the windows, I saw Darnell holding court at the head of the table like he was running for mayor. Laughter drifted out when I opened the front door. No one turned. The dining room smelled like bacon and cinnamon rolls. I stepped in slowly, scanning for an empty seat. There wasn't one. Every chair was taken, siblings, cousins, even someone's neighbor who wasn't even blood. I cleared my throat. Lorraine looked up, offered a polite nod like I was a last-minute guest at someone else's event. She didn't say, "Sit down." She didn't say, "We missed you." Darnell didn't even glance my way. A bar stool was tucked near the kitchen island. I carried it over, made space at the corner of the table, and sat with the same grace I'd learned in rooms where I wasn't invited. Plates were passed. Conversations flowed around me, never to me. I reached for eggs. The platter moved just as I did. I poured juice. No one asked if I wanted coffee. The silence wasn't loud, it was practiced. After a few minutes, Lorraine stood with a glass of orange juice, tapping it lightly with a spoon. All heads turned toward her. "I just want to take a moment," she began, "to honor the one who's been holding this family together." Her eyes landed on Darnell. "To the child who stayed, who took care of the family business when others wandered. Darnell, we're proud of you." There was clapping. Some stood and raised their glasses. I offered a smile. Not because I meant it, but because I'd learned how to wear one like armor. Then Uncle Morris turned to me. He tilted his head the way people do when they're trying to recall your name, but can't quite reach it. "You used to write little poems, didn't you?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Back in school. That was your thing, right?" He chuckled before I could answer. "That's something, ain't it?" Someone laughed behind a napkin. Darnell looked right at me and grinned, the kind that doesn't hide its teeth. I excused myself after the meal. No one asked why. In the hallway, I passed the same photo that haunted me a few days ago. Darnell beside a politician. Handshakes, medals, captions. As I walked to the guest room where I was told I could rest for a bit, I noticed the cabinet door near the hall was slightly ajar. Something inside caught my eye. Curiosity didn't feel like revenge. It felt like survival. I stepped in, found a stack of legal folders, Lorraine's neat handwriting on each tab, tax records, medical bills, property deeds. One folder read, Granny Pearl, land title. I opened it carefully. Inside was the notarized deed from our grandmother's estate. The property had been split equally between her grandchildren, on paper once. Now it had a revised version, one name, Darnell's. I scanned the pages again to be sure. My name wasn't listed, not even as a witness. No letter, no call, no explanation. The signature from Granny Pearl looked digitized, stamped, dull. Darnell's signature was fresh, ink still crisp. I didn't take a picture. Didn't pocket anything. I just closed the folder, slid it back into the cabinet, and pulled the door shut. No slamming, no scenes. On my way out, I passed Lorraine in the hallway. She gave me a look that wasn't guilt, wasn't shame. It was emptiness. I nodded. She didn't ask me to stay longer. Back in my car, the air was warmer than I expected. I rolled the windows down halfway and sat still for a while. Years ago, my father stood at a family reunion and told a room full of people, "She's the delicate one. Emotional. Not cut out for big things. A burden, but she's ours." That was when I was 14. I thought I'd outgrown it. But now, older, wiser, more silent than ever. I realized they hadn't changed their minds. They just learned how to say it without saying it. Through chairs not pulled out, through signatures misplaced, through stories where I didn't exist. Some people inherit homes. Some inherit debt. Me? I inherited silence. The next few days passed in a blur of errands, small talk, and short drives that seemed longer than they used to. I moved through Clarksdale like a stranger playing a part she never auditioned for. I didn't wear grief on my sleeve, but I could feel it in my teeth. On Tuesday afternoon, I stopped by the farmer's market to pick up some peaches. I was scanning a box for the ripest ones when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Well, look who's back in town." I turned and saw Mrs. Carla, the neighbor who used to slip candy into my pockets when I was a kid. She looked older, of course, but still had that warmth in her voice that made you forget how cold the world could be. I gave her a polite smile. "Just for a little while?" She leaned in and gave my shoulder a squeeze. "I'm so glad your mama came through that gallbladder surgery okay. That was scary." The peach in my hand slipped slightly. I adjusted it without blinking. "Surgery?" I asked. Mrs. Carla blinked, confused. "Oh, you didn't know? She was in the hospital a few days ago. Out now, though. Thank the Lord." I nodded, managing to mumble something like, "Yeah, thank God," but the edges of my ears burned. After I left the market, I didn't drive back to the motel. I drove around, just aimless loops, stopped at a gas station, bought a bottle of water I didn't want, sat in the parking lot and stared at the steering wheel. They didn't forget to tell me. They chose not to. That evening, I got invited to Darnell's pre-engagement dinner. It wasn't a formal thing, just close friends and family, according to the message Lorraine forwarded to me, without a single greeting attached. I showed up on time, slipped in through the side door like a background actor who knows not to block the camera. The house was decorated with twinkle lights and photo frames lined up on side tables. Smiling faces. Matching t-shirts from vacations I wasn't invited to. After dinner plates had been cleared, everyone moved into the living room. Lorraine clicked the remote, and a slideshow lit up the flat screen. "Let's take a walk down memory lane," she announced with enthusiasm she never once used for anything involving me. Music played. The kind of sentimental background score that makes people tear up over nothing. Childhood photos, baseball games, dance recitals, first days of school, all edited into a clean, glowing montage. I waited, and never showed up. Even when they played old birthday videos, the camera angles were cropped. Tight frames. Faces turned just enough to cut me out, without making it obvious. When the slideshow ended, everyone clapped. Darnell kissed his fiancée on the cheek. Lorraine dabbed her eyes. I got up and walked to the porch. Outside, the air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. I pulled out my phone. No messages. I scrolled through old emails. The last one from Lorraine had been a forwarded electric bill. No greeting, no context. 2 years ago. Back inside, dessert was being passed around. Brownies and vanilla ice cream. I walked toward the table, but stopped halfway. The chair I'd been sitting in earlier was gone. Someone had taken it, probably to the other room. No one noticed. I stood for a moment, then walked into the kitchen, fixed a plate, and sat by the back door. No one said a word. I didn't expect them to. For years, I thought the worst thing they could do was forget me. I was wrong. The worst thing was knowing they remembered and erased me anyway. I left the house that night without saying goodbye. No one followed me. No one asked if I made it back to the motel. It was almost funny, how easy it had become for them to treat me like a loose thread no one wanted to pull. 2 nights later, around 10:30, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. It was local. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello?" A familiar voice answered, warm in tone but tight at the edges. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom." She said it like we'd spoken yesterday. Like we shared recipes or traded weekend plans. "I hope I didn't wake you. I know it's late, but your brother's in a bit of a bind with the mortgage. Nothing catastrophic, just complicated." She forced a chuckle. He's just stretched thin. The market's so unpredictable these days. I said nothing. We were wondering, she continued, if maybe your boss might be willing to help out. Just a short-term thing. Bridge loan, strictly professional. You know how folks talk. We can't have people thinking we can't keep up. It was surreal. She was asking me to tap into a relationship she assumed I had, for a favor she framed as saving the family's name. I stayed quiet, long enough for her to speak again. Venitra, you there? Still silent. Well, anyway, think about it, okay? It would mean a lot to Darnell, and to me. She didn't say, I miss you. She didn't ask how I was. She just wanted access, through a boss I supposedly worked under. I hung up without answering. The next afternoon, I stopped for gas on the way back from a property inspection. As I filled my tank, Mr. Franklin shuffled over from the pump across the lot. He still wore the same flannel cap and walked with a limp from his army years. Didn't expect to see you back in these parts, he said, nodding. Didn't expect to be back, I replied. He looked at me for a moment, then leaned in slightly. I know it ain't my place, but I figured you ought to know. Your mama and Darnell are about to lose the house. They borrowed heavy, put everything under his name. I stared at him. He kept talking, softer now. Bank already turned him down. They're scrambling. Don't want nobody to find out. My hands were still on the pump handle, but my body had gone still. They're not coming to you because you're family, he said. They're coming because they're out of options. That night, I sat in a quiet booth at a small cafe near downtown. Laptop open, documents pulled up. The address of the house I grew up in was highlighted in yellow. Pending foreclosure. Purchase negotiations already in progress. I didn't need to ask who was handling the file. I was. My name sat at the top of the acquisition paperwork, co-owner of the firm currently working to finalize the buy. I flagged the file for internal handling, not to stop it, to protect it, from interference, from family, from sentiment. A few minutes later, I picked up my phone and called the number Lorraine had used. She answered on the first ring. Venitra? Mom, you asked if my boss could help with Darnell's mortgage, I said flatly. She hesitated. Yes. Did you talk to him? I didn't give her the chance to keep spinning. I am the boss. Silence. I don't approve financial rescues for people who forget I exist until they're underwater. I could hear her breathe in sharply. She tried to recover. That's not fair, baby. You know how family works. Sometimes we fall apart, but we're still blood. Ask Darnell, I said, my voice calm. He's got all the titles, doesn't he? There was a soft gasp, then a sniffle. She was trying not to cry, or trying to make sure I heard her doing it, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften my tone. I've been invisible long enough, I said. Let's keep it consistent. Then I hung up. For a moment, I just sat there. The hum of the fridge behind the counter filled the space around me. The waitress brought a refill without asking. I stirred my coffee slowly. The empire they ignored was about to own the house they worshipped. The next morning, I got a text from Lorraine. Can you swing by the house? Just want to talk. Nothing heavy. She even added a smiley face. I stared at it for a minute, then replied, Sure, 2 o'clock. Before heading over, I stopped at a cafe and picked up an iced tea, then made one more stop, at the firm's satellite office downtown. I asked Hannah, one of my legal advisors, to come along. I didn't tell her why, just asked if she could meet me at the gas station 2 blocks from the house and wait in the car. Just in case. She didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted her. At 2:05, I pulled up the gravel driveway, parked, and walked up to the porch, like I wasn't walking into a setup. Lorraine met me at the door with a practiced smile and a plate of lemon cookies. Darnell's here too, she said, as if that were normal. Just a quick thing to go over. He was already at the kitchen table, papers laid out, pen clipped neatly to the top. Lorraine sat next to him. The plate of cookies stayed untouched. Darnell gestured to the stack. It's just a signature, Mom's credit is shot, and the bank won't give her the time of day without a cosigner. I looked down at the document. Pages and pages of dense legal text, but one thing stood out in bold, underlined font: joint responsibility. All financial burden shared equally by signing parties. No clause for removal. He smiled the way people do when they think they've rehearsed their part well. "Come on," he said. "No risk to you. You've got the money. You don't even need to do anything. Just sign so we can keep the house." Lorraine chimed in softly. "You owe this family something, don't you?" I pulled out my bag, unzipped the side pocket, and set a small digital recorder on the table. "Would you mind repeating that?" They both froze. Darnell's mouth opened, but no words came. Lorraine's smile faded. "I'm going to take this home," I said calmly, collecting the papers. "And have my legal team look it over," Darnell scoffed. "Seriously? You're dragging lawyers into this?" "You did," I replied, "when you brought me into something that's already falling apart." I stood up. Lorraine reached out gently. "Venetra, this is your family. We're not trying to trap you, just asking for help." I met her eyes. "You're asking for access. That's not the same thing." On the way back, I stopped by a diner for a late lunch. It was the kind of place where everyone knew someone's aunt or cousin, where gossip passed like condiments across the table. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee. 10 minutes later, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Denise Chapman. We'd gone to school together, different circles, but still familiar. She leaned in like we were best friends. "I heard you're still mad." I turned slowly. "Darnell says you're freezing them out, just letting them sink, that you like watching it happen." I didn't blink. "You'd be amazed how loud guilt sounds when it's dressed up as duty." She opened her mouth, thought better of it, and left. Back in my car, I laid the contract out across the passenger seat and read every word. Hidden beneath the jargon and fine print was a clear trap, one I was expected to walk into with my eyes closed. The agreement didn't protect me. It exposed me. If Darnell missed a payment, which he would, I'd be liable for the full amount. And there was no clause to opt out. It was signed by him, prepared by his friend's firm, already notarized. I folded the papers neatly, tore the corner just slightly, slid them into an envelope, and attached a sticky note. "This is the last time you mistake silence for compliance." That evening, just as I was sorting through emails at the motel, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail from Lorraine. Her voice, no longer warm. "I raised you better than this. I don't know who you've become, but people are talking. People are asking why you're acting so cold. You're embarrassing this family." I hit play again, then forwarded the file to Hannah. After a pause, I recorded my response. "You didn't raise me. You raised an image, a story, something you could point to in public. But that version of me died the day you taught me love was conditional. I'm not here to perform anymore. I'm not here to be silent for your comfort." I hit send, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. They thought I'd fold like before, but this time, I brought paper that bites back. The courthouse wasn't grand, just tired. Beige carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, and a podium with a microphone that squeaked every time someone adjusted it. I sat in the back row while names were called. Most people were here to dispute fines, finalize property sales, settle debts they couldn't carry anymore. When they called the Henderson case, I stood. I didn't rush. Inside the small hearing room, Darnell was already seated at the front table, Lorraine beside him, flipping nervously through paperwork. A few locals filled the back, probably city staff and a couple of reporters fishing for small-town drama. When I walked in, I didn't look at either of them. I walked straight to the desk and handed over the final signed transfer documents. My name, my firm, everything in order. The clerk gave a brief nod and announced, "Acquisition confirmed, effective immediately." Whispers followed like smoke. Darnell leaned toward Lorraine, muttering, "Bet it's one of those out-of-state developers, probably gonna tear it all down." Then the back door opened again. This time, it was me who stepped through, dressed in navy, clipboard in hand, no apology in my stride. Silence. The kind that doesn't need shushing. I walked past the folding chairs, past the city seal on the wall, and took my place at the other table. The clerk cleared his throat. Just to clarify for the record, Miss Venitra Henderson holds 61% ownership in the purchasing entity and has acted as the primary decision-maker in this acquisition. Lorraine's eyes widened. Darnell froze. The banker beside them stammered. She's had power of attorney on this deal since last quarter, I finished for him, without looking away from the panel. Darnell blinked hard. You went behind our backs. No, I said. I went through the front door. You just weren't watching. I turned toward the counsel. This isn't a family dispute. This is a business conclusion. Lorraine stood abruptly. How could you do this? This house is your legacy, too. I pulled a folder from my bag and opened it. Inside were printouts, forged applications, digitally altered email threads, loan documents submitted with my name, but not my hand. This, I said, holding up a sheet, is the application Darnell submitted 3 years ago using my identity as collateral. I passed another page across the table. And this is the timeline of wire transfers, accounts opened using my SSN, addresses tied to my name, but listed as authorized user, D. Henderson. A low gasp rippled through the back row. I didn't raise my voice. You used me, repeatedly, but I made sure every misuse had a breadcrumb, and now those breadcrumbs lead here. Darnell started to speak, then stopped. His hand trembled as he slid it off the table. One of the council members asked, Miss Henderson, do you intend to press charges? I looked at Darnell for the first time. Not yet, but I've started the clock. Outside, the sun was merciless. Reporters swarmed the steps like bees to a cracked jar of honey. Is it true you just reclaimed your childhood home? Are you planning to evict your own family? Is this about revenge? I didn't answer any of them. I stepped into the car where Hannah waited in the front seat, files already packed away in the back. She looked over her glasses. Well? I exhaled slowly. It's done. And what happens now? They live with it, I said, with the silence, the kind I lived in for 30 years. Behind us, Lorraine sat on the edge of the sidewalk, head in her hands. Darnell paced angrily, trying to talk on his phone, but no one was picking up. As we pulled away, I didn't feel relief. Not victory either, just weight shifting. I didn't have to destroy them. I just let the truth finish what they started. The following week, I was back in Houston, buried in zoning files and back-to-back meetings, trying to push aside the shadow that Clarksdale had left trailing behind me. I didn't say anything about what had happened in the courthouse, not the full version, at least. The ones who needed to know already did. The rest? They'd hear it eventually, the same way I always had. Fragmented, distorted, softened by distance and time, until it no longer resembled truth, only rumor. On Thursday morning, just after 9, the front desk buzzed up to the office. Monica answered, then knocked on my door a moment later, holding a padded manila envelope with no postage, no return address, just hand-delivered, anonymous. I paused my notes on a zoning revision for a commercial lot in Midtown and took the envelope. It was thin but dense, the kind of weight that meant trouble, or at least something meant to stir it. Inside was a set of photocopied documents, neatly stapled. At the top, bold lettering stamped across the first page. Property transfer, Pearl Henderson Estate. My eyes stopped moving. I knew immediately what it was, even before I flipped past the title page. My grandmother's name, Pearl Henderson, appeared on the signature line, but the signature below it wasn't hers, not even close. Her handwriting had always been a little wild, like her voice, loud and swinging with mood. This was tidy, mechanical, a forgery done by someone who had watched her sign checks but never knew her wrist. I turned to the notarization page. The date, 5 years ago. The notary? A firm out of Clarksdale that didn't even exist anymore. Shut down, disgraced. Dead ends, all of it. And then came the name that kept appearing like a bad habit. Darnell. Once as executor, once as witness, and again as heir. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My stomach wasn't tight with shock. That had passed years ago. What I felt was the cold weight of inevitability. While I'd been rebuilding from scratch, scraping together some version of normal 3 states away, they'd been busy rewriting the story. Without me. Without truth. I called Hannah. "Get this submitted to probate," I told her. "Quietly, no press, no announcements." "I'll file it before end of day," she said. "Do you want to be present at the hearing?" "I'll be there, alone." The court date came quickly. Tuesday morning. The courthouse smelled like dust and old paperwork. I showed up early. No family, no bystanders. Just me, Hannah in a charcoal suit, and a judge who looked like he'd seen too many versions of this same story. Hannah handled everything. She was clinical but compelling, methodical as she laid out evidence like a quiet war. She showed digital timelines, voice recordings, sworn affidavits from people who remembered Pearl's voice in those last years. People who remembered who was really there and who wasn't. People who hadn't forgotten what family meant, even if family had forgotten them. There were no objections. No lawyers standing up to argue. No one came to contest it. 15 minutes later, the judge signed off. The documents were declared invalid. The land, nearly 20 acres of hardwood and memory, was legally and irrevocably mine. Always had been, by birth and by blood. The forged transfer was nullified, erased from record like it had never existed. That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, lights off except for one lamp. I pulled out an old leather-bound journal from a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Between 2 dog-eared pages, there was a letter, yellowed at the edges, folded 3 times, still unmailed. It began, "Dear Mom, I don't know how to say this without sounding ungrateful, but..." I read it slowly, as if reading someone else's handwriting. And maybe I was. The person who wrote that letter was younger, more hopeful. They believed in reconciliation, in clarity, in second chances. It wasn't a bad letter. If anything, it was kind. Too kind. But it didn't belong anymore. Not to me. Not to the life I'd built since. I tore it down the fold lines, piece by piece. Not in anger. Just with finality. There are some truths that outlive their purpose. Some stories you outgrow. The next morning, I drafted a new letter. It didn't start with "Dear," no greeting, no farewell. Just a plain, unvarnished message. You may continue to reside on the property until your affairs are settled. I will not evict you. I will not return. This is not an act of punishment. It is a boundary, for your dignity and for mine. No signature, just initials, no address, just a P.O. box. I slipped it into an envelope and dropped it in the mailbox downstairs, then walked a block and a half to a quiet cafe, ordered coffee, sat by the window, and watched Houston start its day. That evening, I was back on the highway. The Clarksdale exit came up on my right. Familiar green signs, same mile markers, same pull. But I didn't slow down. I didn't look. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, the skyline ahead glowing like a promise I could finally believe in. In the rearview mirror, I saw nothing I needed to return to. Forgiveness isn't a performance, and silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means freedom. Sometimes it's both. It had rained the night before, one of those quiet storms that doesn't announce itself with thunder, just slips in and rearranges the air. The next morning, everything outside my window looked sharper, like the skyline had been freshly outlined. I brewed coffee and stood barefoot on my balcony, watching the sun push through the clouds. There was no sense of conclusion, just space, breathing room. Later that day, I met my team at a duplex in East Austin, newly renovated. Nothing grand, just clean lines, soft yellow paint, a pair of modest porches. The kind of home that doesn't boast, but offers safety. I walked through the rooms slowly, hand brushing over walls, fingertips grazing windowsills. It wasn't mine in the way Clarksdale was mine. It was mine in a better way. Not inherited, not stolen back. Built. Chosen. My assistant, Tasha, stood in the hallway, iPad in hand. "We're good to sign off," she said. "Want me to finalize the paperwork with the foundation?" I nodded. She paused. "Why this one, though? We've passed on bigger properties." I looked around one last time. "Because it's not about square footage. It's about message." She tilted her head. "What message?" "That no one should have to earn the right to be seen." That afternoon, I returned to the office. There was a missed call on my phone. Clarksdale area code. No voicemail, just a call that rang once and hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't need to wonder who it was. Some bridges don't need burning. They just don't lead anywhere anymore. I hit delete and tucked the phone away. That night, I hosted dinner at my house. My house. No last-minute invitations, no passive-aggressive questions about seating charts. Just my team, a few close friends, and my mentor, Mrs. Pearson, who'd once told me, "Sometimes family isn't blood. It's who shows up when your name isn't trending." We had gumbo and cornbread. Someone brought peach cobbler from a bakery downtown. There was music, soft Motown in the background, and conversation that didn't circle around survival or obligation. Midway through the evening, I excused myself to the hallway. On the wall hung a photo, the day we opened our first office. I was in the center, flanked by Hannah and Tasha, everyone grinning, exhausted and proud. That picture used to make me ache. Now it felt like proof. A guest wandered over, a friend of a friend. He pointed to the photo and said, "You've built something incredible. Does your family know?" I smiled. "They'll hear about it eventually, but it's not for them." He looked puzzled, then nodded. Before everyone left, I handed out thank you notes. Not because it was expected, but because I wanted to. No strings, no debts, just appreciation. After the dishes were cleared and the last hugs exchanged, I sat alone with a cup of tea and my journal. I hadn't written in it since I tore up that letter, but tonight felt like it needed marking. I wrote slowly. "You don't win by being invited back. You win by realizing you never needed to audition in the first place. You win by knowing you're enough, even when no one claps." I closed the journal, set it beside the lamp, and walked to the balcony again. The storm had passed. The wind had quieted. My breath felt steady in my chest. They thought I was a silence they could manage. But this empire? It's not made of walls or land. It's made of the woman they never saw coming. "Hi there, I'm Maribel. My parents gave away the house I grew up in, to my sister. Then they moved me into the garage, like some forgotten storage box they didn't want to throw away just yet. They told themselves it was temporary. But then came the guest lists I wasn't on, the family photos without me, the business loan I never agreed to. But they used the house to get it. Was it just thoughtlessness, or something far worse? And what happened when I finally made one call? Let me tell you what they never expected I'd do next. I pulled into the driveway just after noon. The gravel under my tires crackled like it didn't recognize me. The house hadn't changed much on the outside. Same porch swing, same worn shutters. But I knew better than to think it was the same house I left years ago. Familiarity, I've learned, is not the same thing as belonging. Clara, my mother, stepped out onto the porch with a folded dish towel in her hand. She offered me a smile that was polite, not warm. She didn't hug me, just nodded like we were neighbors and said, "You'll be in the den for now. Lorene's using the guest room with the kids." I didn't ask why. I'd already packed with the assumption I wouldn't be truly welcome. I walked past her, wheeling the single suitcase I'd brought with me, not because I planned to travel light, but because I didn't expect to stay long. Inside, the house smelled like citrus cleaning spray and lavender plug-ins. Clara hated open windows, said fresh air dragged in dust. I took a deep breath anyway, hoping something of my childhood would drift through. It didn't. The den still had the same green recliner my father loved, but the couch had been replaced with a pull-out. No photos, no bookshelves, no remnants of who I was. She gestured toward it and said, "The sheets are clean. There's a fan in the corner if you get warm. I thanked her and sat down, listening to the distant hum of a dryer somewhere. No one else came to greet me. Not my father, not Lorene, not even the kids I'd seen in family holiday cards. I assumed they were upstairs. Or maybe not. Maybe I'd stopped being family the minute I stepped away years ago. After I set my bag down, I asked, "Is my old room still there?" My voice cracked a little, but I hoped she didn't catch it. Clara tilted her head. "Oh, we converted it. Lorene needed space for her yoga stuff and storage for the kids' clothes. You understand, right?" I nodded. That was always the rule in this house. You nod. You don't ask again. You make yourself smaller so others can stretch their legs. Still, I walked down the hallway. My hand grazed the frame of the door that used to be mine. The paint was newer, the smell synthetic. I opened it. The room was unrecognizable. A rubber mat covered the hardwood floor I used to slide across in socks. Boxes lined the walls, neatly labeled Lorene, Summer, Kids, Toys, Workout Bands. Where my desk had been, there was now a standing shelf of aromatherapy diffusers and dumbbells. The bookshelf my grandfather built when I was 10 was gone. When I asked about it, Clara said, "We donated it. No one was using it anymore." I wanted to say it wasn't just a bookshelf. It was a piece of memory, soaked in childhood sleepovers and late-night journal entries. But I stayed silent. My silence was easier for them to manage. Dinner that night was chili from a crock pot. We sat around the table, me, Clara, Harland, and Lorene, who arrived 10 minutes late in yoga pants and a blazer. She talked about expanding her wellness brand, casually mentioning a new location in Portland. She looked at me once and said, "You'll feel better now that you're back to simplicity. There's something freeing about not having to manage everything, isn't there?" I didn't respond. Harlan spooned more chili into his bowl and said nothing. I couldn't tell if that was his way of keeping peace or avoiding discomfort. Maybe both. Lorene kept going. "Resetting can be such a gift. You're lucky, really. Not everyone gets the chance to rebuild." It wasn't sarcasm. That's what made it worse. After the dishes were cleared, I sat on the back steps by myself. The night air was cool, soft against my cheeks. Somewhere inside, Lorene's kids giggled over something on a screen. Clara vacuumed upstairs, her rhythm mechanical. Harland watched the news in his recliner, volume turned low. No one came out. No one asked how I was adjusting. No one offered a blanket. Later, when I lay down on the pullout, the mattress creaked under me. The ceiling fan above spun with a lazy rhythm, the kind that doesn't cool, just moves air from corner to corner. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. My bag sat unpacked. There wasn't really a drawer to use anyway. From the hallway, I heard Lorene's laugh echo. Sharp, vibrant, full of life. I turned to face the wall and whispered, more to myself than anyone else. I came home. And somehow, I'm the one who doesn't belong. I didn't expect a red carpet, but I didn't think I'd be sent to the garage either. It was just after 7 the next morning when Clara tapped gently on the den door. I was already awake, had been for a while. The ceiling fan had done little through the night besides shuffle around the warm air, and I'd spent most of it staring into the dark, wondering when I'd started being treated like a guest in my own family. Clara didn't come all the way in. She stayed in the doorway like she was checking in on a sleeping child. "Lorene didn't sleep well," she said, her voice coated in that soft, well-practiced maternal tone she used when she didn't want to sound like she was giving orders. You know how she gets when she's this far along. I sat up slowly, rubbing my shoulder where the metal bar under the mattress had left its mark. "Is everything all right?" "We were thinking," she said, eyes drifting anywhere but mine. "Just for now, you could move into the garage. It's quieter, more private. You'd have your own space. Lorene really needs rest." "Isn't that where we keep the old garden tools and the paint cans?" I asked, trying to smile so it wouldn't come off as a protest. She gave a shrug, half nod. "We moved most of it. It's tidy now. It'll be fine." There's a little heater, and I put some shelves up for you." There was no discussion, just the kind of statement framed as a favor to me, but clearly done to make someone else more comfortable. I didn't push back. I just nodded and got up to pack the few things I'd unpacked the night before. The garage door was already open when I stepped out. Morning air carried the smell of damp leaves and fertilizer. A twin-sized cot sat against the back wall, next to a small plastic dresser, and a lamp that looked like it had been pulled from a yard sale. A single extension cord snaked its way across the concrete to power the lamp and a humming space heater. The window near the ceiling didn't open. There was no insulation, just drywall that still showed patches from when my father had tried to hang shelves and given up halfway. I set my bag down and sat on the cot. The springs let out a sound that reminded me of the creaky swing set we'd had as kids, the one that had been taken down the year Lorene went to college. My name had never been carved into that frame either. I stayed there most of the day. No one checked in. No one offered help setting things up. Around 5, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. I straightened up a little, hoping it might be someone coming to talk. Instead, Lorene's friend appeared at the side door, holding a bag of pastel-colored gift wrap. She looked inside and blinked when she saw me folding a basket of laundry. "Oh, sorry, I thought this was the laundry room. Are you the nanny? Or—" Before I could say a word, Lorene came up behind her. "She's just helping out for a while," she said with a practiced smile. No correction. No, that's my sister. Just a gentle, dismissive cover story to explain away my existence. I didn't correct her either. I just nodded once and kept folding the same towel I'd already refolded twice. The friend gave a quick, awkward smile and disappeared inside with the bag. Lorene didn't say anything else. She just followed her in, chatting about some new product line and a podcast interview. That evening, I made myself a sandwich in the kitchen, careful not to use the good dishes. Clara passed behind me at one point and said, "There's leftover quiche in the fridge." "I'm fine," I replied. I didn't want a favor. I wanted a place. Back in the garage, I sat on the edge of the cot, chewing slowly. The heater rattled and groaned like it might give out at any minute. A raccoon rustled through the trash outside, its claws scraping the plastic lid of the bin. When I finished eating, I pulled a dusty photo album from the plastic bin I'd brought with me. The pages stuck a little, the plastic yellowed from age. There I was, on the edge of the family vacation photo in Yosemite, half turned and half out of frame. At my high school graduation, standing behind Lorene, who was front and center with both parents' arms around her. Even in the Christmas photo, I was off to the side, cropped in like a placeholder. They didn't need to erase me. They'd already edited me out. I stayed up longer than I should have that night, staring at the warped ceiling of the garage, trying not to think. But when the thoughts come quietly, they settle deep. By morning, I'd told myself to let it go, that this was temporary, that I was just overreacting. But temporary has a way of stretching itself thin until it covers a whole season. 3 days later, Clara decided to throw a small dinner gathering. She called it a family appreciation night, something to celebrate Lorene's pregnancy and Harland stepping away from full-time work. It was nothing fancy, some catered platters, paper lanterns strung across the back patio, a few folks from town invited over. I assumed I'd help with setup, cleanup, and smile politely, like usual. That afternoon, I laid out forks and napkins on the long table in the backyard, careful to keep the spacing even. I heard them inside rehearsing. Lorene had written something she wanted to say after dinner. A few heartfelt words, she called it. When the guests arrived, I didn't recognize most of them. Church friends, Lorene's business contacts, one of Harlan's old buddies from the construction firm. No one looked twice at me. I stayed in motion, refilling water pitchers, tossing salad, gathering empty glasses. After dessert, Clara stood up and tapped her wine glass with a spoon. "We're so grateful to have everyone here tonight. This family's been through a lot, and we're blessed to have people around us who've lifted us through it." She smiled at Lorene, who rose with a note card in her hand. Her voice was confident, clear. She looked around the table and began. To the people who've stood by us, held this house together, who raised me, guided me, and believed in me. The words floated, wrapped in her charm, her timing perfect. She thanked their mother for her endless support. She praised Harland for his steady guidance. She even mentioned a few community members by name for being second families when things got hard. Not once did my name leave her lips. I'd driven Clara to her physical therapy appointments twice a week for months. I'd scrubbed the floor when Harland was sick and vomiting in the hallway. I'd cleaned up the backyard before the guests arrived, and I was invisible. When she finished, the table applauded. I kept clapping just a second longer than I needed to, just enough to keep my hands moving while I blinked a little faster. I glanced around. Odessa hadn't been invited. If she had, she would have caught it. She always saw what others pretended not to. After the last guests left and Clara headed to the kitchen with Lorene to put leftovers away, I wandered down the hallway. I didn't really know why. Maybe just to be somewhere quiet. I ended up in the main corridor where the family wall used to be. They'd redone it. The photos were all new, clean frames, matching colors, symmetrical arrangement. Lorene's wedding portrait took center position. On either side, pictures of her children. Harland and Clara's anniversary photo, one of Harland with Lorene at a local ribbon-cutting ceremony. A shot of Lorene's husband holding their youngest near a pumpkin patch. Not a single picture of me. Not even the one from high school graduation that used to hang by the thermostat. That frame now held a close-up of Lorene's daughter wearing oversized sunglasses. I leaned in, half hoping I'd just missed myself somewhere, even in the background. I hadn't. My image, my presence, was gone. And I realized it wasn't an oversight. It was an edit. Back in the garage, I changed into an old sweatshirt and sat on the cot, the space heater rumbling in the corner. I wrapped the sleeves around my waist and stared at the wall. I thought about every errand, every load of laundry, every dinner I cooked without being asked. Then I remembered something Lorene used to say in high school when she got caught lying. You can't blame people for telling a cleaner version of the truth. It's just better that way. I guess she still believed that. I reached for the photo album again, but paused. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of the plastic dresser and pulled out a frame I hadn't touched since I moved in. It was a picture of me in 5th grade, standing beside Grandma Ruth at the local fall fair. We were both laughing. My hair was wild, hers was in a tight bun, and we were holding matching caramel apples. It was the one photo where I was centered, arms around someone who actually saw me. I wrapped the frame in a scarf and tucked it into my bag. If I didn't exist in their version of the story, maybe it was time I wrote my own. The next morning, I left early. I didn't wait for anyone to ask where I was going. I slipped out through the side door with a scarf wrapped around my neck and my hands stuffed deep in my coat pockets. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, and the grass was still wet from the sprinklers. It was cold enough to see my breath, but I welcomed the quiet. I walked the length of the neighborhood twice, circling back only when I figured they'd all be busy with their routines. Lorene on a client call, Clara planning dinner, Harland tinkering in the shed like always. I needed space before I could go back into that house. When I returned, I entered through the garage, took off my coat, and walked into the kitchen to rinse out my thermos. Lorene's son, Mason, was standing near the counter with another boy around his age, probably a school friend. They were eating crackers and giggling over something on his phone. The other boy looked up at me first. Then Mason followed his gaze and pointed, like he was stating a fact. That's the lady who lives in the garage. The other kid blinked. Is she like your grandma or something? Mason shook his head. Nah, she's not family. Right, Mom? Lorene had just stepped into the room, holding a bag of folded towels. She didn't look up. She didn't say anything to correct them. She smiled, tight, polite, and changed the subject entirely. Why don't you two go outside and play before it gets too hot? They ran off laughing, and I stood there, still holding the thermos under the faucet. The water had started to overflow. I turned it off quietly, set the cup aside, and walked back out to the garage before anyone could ask how I felt about being referred to like I was a stray cat. That's how stories are written in families like mine. Casually, out loud, and left uncorrected. I spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact. I stayed busy, organized a few of my old files, wrote some notes, took a long walk down to the park, and sat on a bench for an hour doing nothing in particular. It wasn't about hiding, it was about staying out of the way. But after dinner, Clara caught me in the hallway. I'd passed on eating with them, claiming I had a headache. She asked, "You're okay out there in the garage, aren't you?" I gave her a small smile. "It's fine." She hesitated. "Your sister's been under a lot of stress. The business, the baby. She's really stepped up for this family." There it was. I asked softly, "And I haven't?" Clara looked away. She's taken on so much. She's the one carrying this family right now." I waited, for anything else, for a single word of recognition. For her to remember the drives to doctor's appointments, the nights I stayed up with her while she had panic attacks during Harlan's surgery, the meals I cooked, the bills I paid when they were behind on utilities last year. She didn't say any of that. She just sighed and walked away. I stood there for a while, long after the conversation had ended, watching the light under the bathroom door flicker from someone inside. My feet hurt, my chest felt heavy, but my head was clear. They'd already made up their minds. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I started walking more. Every afternoon, I'd grab my shoes and just go. No explanation, no return time. I stopped replying to Lorene's texts when she asked me to pick up milk or grab the mail. I didn't stop helping, I just stopped being available on command. At meals, I kept my earbuds in and nodded when spoken to. If Harlan asked about the heater, I told him it worked fine. If Clara asked if I wanted leftovers, I told her no, thank you. I wasn't angry in a loud way. I just started pulling myself out of the scenes they didn't realize I'd never belonged in. One evening, I sat on the back porch after they'd all gone to bed. I opened an old notebook I hadn't touched in years. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. I flipped to a clean page and began to write. It wasn't poetry or anything elegant, just pieces of thoughts. I wrote, "If I don't belong to them, maybe I belong to the part of myself I forgot to defend." It was the first sentence I'd written for myself in a long time. Later that night, lying on the cot with the hum of the heater keeping rhythm, I opened the notebook again. I only wrote one more line, but I pressed the pen down hard enough that it almost tore the page. "If you keep cutting me out, don't be surprised when I stop bleeding." The next morning came heavy, like the air was trying to hold me in place. I moved slower than usual, not out of tiredness, but out of deliberation. Every step felt measured. I made myself a mug of coffee in the kitchen before anyone else was up, drinking it in silence with my back to the window. I knew about the baby shower before they said a word. Clara had left the invitation list on the counter next to a stack of envelopes. I wasn't on it. Neither was Odessa. I didn't say anything when I saw it. I just read it once, set it down, and rinsed out my cup. The day of the shower arrived like any other, but the energy inside the house was different, brighter, buzzier. Lorene's friends showed up in sundresses and heels, carrying pastel gift bags and store-bought cupcakes stacked in careful towers. Harlan grilled. Clara fussed with tablecloths. No one asked me to help, but I still refilled the lemonade and set out extra forks. I wasn't invisible that day. I was background, the kind of presence you see out of the corner of your eye and choose not to acknowledge because it's easier that way. I stayed mostly in the hallway, coming and going through the side entrance, making myself small, but that didn't shield me from what I heard. One woman, probably one of Lorene's colleagues, stepped into the hallway with her phone out, snapping photos of the setup. "Lorene!" she called out with a grin. "This guest room is better decorated than most hotels I've stayed in." Lorene laughed, loud enough for the entire kitchen to hear. "Oh, we keep the garage for special guests," she said, pausing just long enough to let it land. Like my sister. The room roared. Light-hearted laughter bounced off the walls like a tennis ball no one wanted to catch. I froze. I wasn't shocked. Not really. What stunned me was how smooth it came out of her mouth. How easily she turned me into a punchline for people who didn't even know my name. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a scene. I walked into the garage, grabbed my coat, and left. No slamming doors, no slammed words. I didn't come back until dusk. By then, the backyard lights were dimmed. The music had been turned off. Paper plates littered the patio table. Clara was inside wiping down counters. Lorene was upstairs. Harlan sat in his chair, TV flickering across his face. I stood in the garage, door still cracked open behind me, staring at the string of lights above the lawn. The same ones we used to hang for 4th of July. I used to think they made the house look magical. Now they just made it look staged. Later that night, I called Clara and Harlan into the kitchen. They came eventually. I didn't sit. I didn't offer coffee or soften my tone. "I've been quiet for too long," I began. "That ends tonight." They looked at each other, then at me. "I live in the garage," I said. "I get left out of family gatherings. I watch you hang pictures of everyone but me. I hear you joke about where I sleep. And I let it slide, again and again, because I kept telling myself maybe you didn't mean it." I paused, then continued. "But you do mean it. You meant all of it. And I'm done pretending otherwise." Harlan scoffed. "You're lucky we let you stay at all." Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. "This house doesn't belong to you anymore," he added flatly. "That was decided a long time ago." I nodded once. "I know." From the hallway, Lorene stood halfway down the stairs, arms crossed, watching like she was evaluating a performance. I looked her in the eye, then turned back to my parents. "You've made it clear I don't belong here," I said. "But just so we're all clear, I'm not going to sit in the corner anymore and play dumb while you erase me." No one responded, no apologies, no arguments, just the kind of silence that confirms everything you already knew. That night, I pulled out my phone and took photos. Quietly, without fanfare. I documented every item in the house that used to be mine. The quilt Grandma Ruth had sewn by hand, now folded over the back of Lorene's couch. A framed certificate I received in high school, half buried in a utility drawer next to some expired batteries. Even the ceramic figurine I'd painted as a kid, now tucked behind a row of essential oil bottles in the bathroom. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was collecting what little proof remained that I'd once had a place here. I opened a folder on my phone and titled it, "Proof I Existed." Before I went to bed, I gathered some of my old paperwork and began organizing it on the fold-out table in the garage. Tax documents, school records, even receipts from bills I'd paid on the house years ago. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but something told me I'd need these soon. I zipped everything into a small file bag and slid it under the cot. Then I stepped outside and stood on the driveway, facing the house. Every light inside was on. People only leave every light on when they want a place to look warm, or when they're trying to blind themselves to what they don't want to see. "If this place isn't mine," I whispered to no one, "then they shouldn't be using pieces of me to decorate it." The wind had picked up overnight, scattering pine needles across the driveway by the time I stepped outside the next morning. I'd barely slept, but I wasn't tired. Something in me had shifted, steadied, the quiet kind of clarity that usually follows a storm. I made coffee in the kitchen while Clara sorted through a pile of grocery flyers at the table. She didn't say anything, neither did I. Just the clink of my spoon against the inside of the mug broke the silence. As I poured the last of the cream, I heard Lorene's voice floating in from the living room. "I've handled everything since moving in," she was saying to a woman I didn't recognize. "Mom and Dad couldn't keep up on their own, not with all the appointments and house stuff. I took over all of it." The woman made some agreeable noise. I didn't catch the rest. I just stood there, still stirring, my eyes fixed on the ripple in my coffee. "Handled everything?" I thought about the time I spent on hold with the insurance company when Clara's claim was denied. About the doctor's office visits, the bank trips, the errands in the rain when no one else had time. That was the thing about being useful. If no one sees it, it's as if it never happened. I took my cup and walked out without a word. Later that afternoon, while returning the vacuum to the hallway closet, I passed by Harlan's office. The door was ajar, just enough to hear his voice. He was on the phone. His tone was firm, practiced. "Yes." The appraisal came back clean. "We'll be signing everything Tuesday. It's just a short-term lien, secured by the house. Nothing unusual." I stood there, frozen. I didn't move until the call ended and he closed the door behind him. That evening, Clara and I crossed paths in the hallway. She looked unusually upbeat, holding a grocery list. "Did you know Lorene's husband is opening another studio?" she said, casual as anything. "They're using the house, just temporarily, to get the loan through. It'll be fine." I stared at her, letting the words hit one by one. "Using the house?" I repeated. She nodded like it was already settled. "It's standard business these days. Everything's under control." "No one told me." She blinked, almost like she hadn't expected me to respond. "Did anyone think to ask?" I said again, this time sharper. Harlan came around the corner and stopped when he saw us. "You weren't on the deed," he said plainly. "Why would we?" And that was it. That was the moment I stopped waiting for kindness and started preparing for facts. I spent the next few hours in the garage sorting through old boxes, papers I hadn't looked at in years, utility bills with my name, property tax statements where I was listed as co-payer, receipts from a roof repair I coordinated back when a storm knocked out half the shingles. I laid everything on the fold-out table, flattening corners, arranging them by date. I took photos of each document with my phone, uploading them into a secure drive. Then I called Dana. She used to work with a real estate lawyer before switching careers. We hadn't talked in a while, but she picked up on the second ring. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I have a question about property law." There was a pause. "Okay, that's a new one. If someone lived in a house for years, paid taxes, covered repairs, even paid down part of the mortgage, do they have any legal standing if the property was transferred without their knowledge? You talking about your parents' place?" "Yes." "You might. Depends on how clean the paperwork was. You'll want to check title history, timelines, anything that proves active contribution. You'd need to file a notice of interest at the very least." "Why?" "They're using the house as collateral for Lorene's husband's business loan. No one told me." Dana let out a long breath. "Send me everything. I'll look at it tonight." I thanked her and ended the call. By midnight, I'd scanned and sent everything I had. Receipts, bills, my personal statement, even a signed card from Harlan 5 years ago that said, "Thanks for covering the property taxes this quarter. We would have been in trouble without you." I didn't sleep much. At 2:17 a.m., I opened a new email and typed "urgent property question" into the subject line. I attached 3 of the most relevant documents. I hovered over the send button. "If they think silence is consent," I whispered to the glow of the screen, "they're about to learn otherwise." Then I clicked. By sunrise, the garage felt colder than usual. The air was still, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet you feel before something breaks. I made coffee, checked my email, and waited. It didn't take long. At 9:03 a.m., Dana replied. Her message was short, but the words stuck in my chest like pins. "The deed was transferred 6 months ago. You're not on it. Lorene is listed as sole owner. You'll want to talk to someone about this, soon." 6 months ago, I had been driving Clara to follow-ups after her surgery, managing their grocery lists, and patching the backyard fence because Harlan didn't want to deal with it. I was in and out of pharmacies, filling prescriptions. I slept in that house more nights than I slept anywhere else. I didn't get a call, not a mention, not a signature request, not even a heads up. I sat with the email for a few minutes, my fingers tapping the edge of my mug. When the silence inside the garage became too loud, I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked through the house without knocking. Harland was sitting at the kitchen table with a newspaper and half a banana. He looked up as I entered, barely lowering the paper. "I have a question," I said calmly, though my voice had lost all softness. He grunted. "Go ahead." "The house. You signed it over to Lorene 6 months ago?" He blinked slowly. "It was time." "Time for what?" I asked. "To erase me legally, since the emotional part didn't take?" Harland shrugged. "You were never on the title. And that's your excuse?" "It's not an excuse, it's a fact," he said, his tone clipped. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and there she was. Lorene, dressed in her usual Lululemon, sipping something green from a mason jar. She didn't stop walking, just slowed enough to throw a line over her shoulder. "You were a visitor, Maribel, not a stakeholder. Why would anyone loop in someone just crashing?" I let out a breath, not out of exasperation, but to keep myself from laughing. The kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but disbelief. "No," I said. "I wasn't crashing. I was cleaning, driving, fixing, paying, and you all knew that." Harland folded his paper. "It's done. You can either accept it or keep playing the victim." I stood there for a few seconds more, scanning both of their faces. They didn't look ashamed. They looked rehearsed. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky, orange and blue, Odessa showed up. No call, no warning. Just the sound of her knock on the side door of the garage. I opened it, startled. "Hey," she said, holding a worn envelope. "I think you're going to want this." I stepped aside, and she came in, placing the envelope on the table. Her hands trembled a little. "I was sorting through some of Mom's old recipe books. This was tucked inside one of them." I opened it. It was her handwriting, Grandma Ruth's. Dated nearly a year before she passed. "If anything happens to me before I can finish the legal documents," it read, "let this letter stand as my clear intent. The west half of the property, Maribel's, because she is the one who still sees this house as home, not a transaction." I sat down. The words blurred at the edges, but I kept reading it over and over again. Odessa exhaled. "Clara was the executor, right? That means she either never saw this, or saw it and didn't act." I nodded slowly, rage creeping in like a steady tide. "She saw it," I said. We sat in silence for a while. The heater kicked on, a soft hum in the background. "I don't know if it's legally binding," I whispered, more to myself than her. "Doesn't need to be," she replied. "You show this to the right people, and it creates enough doubt to make Lorene sweat." That night, I stayed up until after midnight again. I scanned the letter, saved it to the same cloud folder I'd created for all my documents, and started building a timeline. I listed everything: dates, repairs, appointments, who said what and when. I pulled up property records, downloaded PDFs, and flagged discrepancies. Then I drafted a short narrative. I wasn't trying to win in court, not yet. I just wanted the truth on record. Before I shut my laptop, I opened a new message and attached the scanned letter. I didn't put my name on the email. I didn't have to. The recipient, Lorene's main business investor. I'd found his email linked to the press release from her last studio launch. In the subject line, I typed, "Question regarding property transfer plus pending loan." I hit send. Then I closed the lid, turned off the light, and whispered to the dark, "Let's see how stable her image stays when the cracks become public." The morning after I sent the anonymous email, I woke up before the sun. The garage was still, save for the faint hum of the heater cycling on. I stayed under the covers a moment longer, listening. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I felt like a wire pulled tight, finally ready to snap back. By mid-morning, I was parked outside the small law office in town. I had called ahead and asked to speak with a mediator. Not a litigator, not yet. I didn't want war. I wanted boundaries, and I wanted them enforced by someone who didn't share my blood. We sat in a small room that smelled faintly of printer toner and old carpet. I explained my situation plainly, without dramatics, just the facts. I laid out the scanned letter from Grandma Ruth, the tax records, the caretaking notes I had kept without even realizing why. The attorney listened quietly, occasionally jotting something down. He leaned back once I finished and said, "We can't reverse the deed outright with just this, but we can file a notice of interest on the property. It's a formal declaration that you're disputing the legitimacy of the transfer. It doesn't change ownership, but it prevents them from selling or refinancing until your claim is reviewed." "That's what I want," I said. He nodded. "It'll be filed this afternoon." Back at the garage, I opened the windows to let the air move through for the first time in weeks. I didn't bother hiding what I was doing anymore. If Clara asked, I'd tell her. But she didn't ask. Neither did Harland. They must have known something was coming. By early evening, I overheard Lorene's voice carry through the floorboards. "What do you mean he backed out?" She snapped on the phone. There was a pause, then her voice again, louder. "Pending clarification? Clarification of what?" I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew who he was. Her investor. I closed the window and waited. The knock on the garage door came 30 minutes later. "Family meeting?" Harland called through the crack. I followed him inside without a word. Clara was already seated at the kitchen table, hands folded tightly. Lorene leaned against the counter, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they were barely there. Harland opened. "You sent something to Lorene's investor?" I didn't blink. "Yes." "Why?" Clara asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you all decided I didn't matter," I said, "and I needed someone outside this house to see that I do." Lorene scoffed, stepping forward. "You were never meant to stay here, Maribel. You made your life a mess and then tried to crawl back into mine." I looked at her square in the eye. "I didn't crawl. I walked in. You just kept locking every door behind me." The silence was thick. Nobody moved. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed copies of the letter, the one from Grandma Ruth, and placed them carefully on the table, one in front of each of them. "I'm not trying to take anything that was never mine," I said, "but I won't let you keep what was." Clara stared at the paper like it might bite her. Harland didn't touch his. Lorene glanced at hers, then rolled her eyes. "I don't care what some dead woman wrote," she muttered. "You should," I said, "because she's the only one in this family who ever made me feel like I mattered." With that, I turned and walked out. Not in anger, not in defeat, but in certainty. Odessa was waiting in her car by the curb, engine running. We didn't speak until we were halfway across town. "Where to?" she asked. "Anywhere with room to breathe," I replied. That night, I stayed at Odessa's for the first time since all of this began. She had set up a cot in her art studio. There were brushes and jars and half-finished pottery on shelves. It smelled like clay and oil paint and safety. Before bed, I stepped outside with a cup of tea. Her porch light flickered as I looked back toward the direction of the house. Their house. The house that used to feel like home. "They tried to bury me in the garage," I said softly, almost to myself, "but I grew roots instead." The next morning, I woke to the scent of cinnamon and brewed coffee drifting through Odessa's studio. It wasn't a luxury, just her regular routine, but it felt like warmth, like breath. I sat on the cot a while before moving, watching the morning light creep across the concrete floor. Nothing in me wanted to run anymore. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't chasing recognition or begging for space. Over the next few weeks, life didn't explode. It didn't unravel or collapse. It just slowed, quieted. I started helping Odessa sort her art supplies. Sometimes I'd raid next to the kiln while she worked. Other days, I took long walks through town without worrying about bumping into anyone. I didn't check the Zillow listing for the house. I didn't ask Odessa for updates on Lorene or Harland or Clara. I taught a small workshop at the library one Thursday evening, something Odessa encouraged. Just 6 women showed up, all in their 40s and 50s, divorced, widowed, recovering from something no one dared to name aloud. We spoke about setting boundaries, saying no without guilt, speaking even when your voice shook. One woman cried when she said, "I used to apologize just for entering a room." I told her, "Me too." Later that weekend, at the grocery store, while I stood in line with a bag of oranges and a notepad full of ideas for a second workshop, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor. She looked me up and down, took in my calm, and smiled. "You always were the quiet one," she said. "Turns out, you were the one with a backbone." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt real. "I think it just took me longer to use it," I replied. Word about the letter, Grandma Ruth's letter, had found its way into conversations around town. No gossip, no scandal, just quiet nods and polite shifts in tone when people spoke about Lorene's business. Her investors didn't return. Her expansion stalled. Clara avoided community events altogether, citing overwhelm. Harland kept his same schedule, but looked smaller each time someone passed him in church, without saying hello. I didn't wish them misery. I didn't want revenge. I wanted them to sit with what they'd built, without me. One morning, a month after I'd moved in with Odessa, I sat at her kitchen table and penned a letter of my own. Not to Harland or Clara, or even Lorene. I wrote it for the day one of them might come looking, when denial runs out and silence no longer works. I folded it neatly and slid it into an envelope. I dated it, signed it. I gave it to Odessa and said, "Keep this, for when they're ready to ask, not when I'm ready to explain." The letter didn't accuse. It didn't rant. It simply listed the truth. Dates, moments, roles played. The quiet work, the hours no one saw. The history they'd written without me, corrected in ink only I knew how to hold. Then I turned the page. I visited the nursery Grandma Ruth used to take me to every spring. The same wooden arches still stood over the front walkway. I walked through slowly, hand trailing over pots of marigolds and rows of hydrangeas, until I stopped in front of a slender cherry blossom sapling. The owner, a soft-spoken man with white hair, asked if I needed help. I told him, "Just this one." He loaded it into the back of Odessa's car. When we returned, I walked it to the edge of the small plot I'd rented from the community garden project on the east side of town. The soil was already tilled. I dug slowly, pressing the roots into the earth with my bare hands. Odessa watched from a few steps away, holding the watering can. "What's it for?" she asked. "To remember that roots don't care where they're planted," I said, smoothing the dirt around the base. "They just need room." By sunset, the sapling stood alone, thin and unassuming, but upright. And so was I. As I sat on the bench across from it, hands streaked with soil, a breeze moved through the trees behind us. I whispered to the air, just loud enough for myself. They gave the house to someone else, but they'll never again get to decide who I am inside it. Sometimes, we stay too long in places that stopped being home the moment we stopped being seen. I didn't leave my family because I hated them. I left because I finally chose to love myself enough not to stay where I was erased. And that's not bitterness, that's survival. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence might keep the peace for a while, but it will never bring justice. If your presence is treated like a burden, then maybe your absence will become a mirror. You don't need to scream to be powerful. Sometimes quiet choices, walking away, filing a letter, planting something new, are what reclaim your place in the world. Now I want to ask you, have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who should have known your worth? Have you ever given too much and gotten silence in return? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a 1 in the comments if this touched your heart in any way, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, Tell me why. Every voice deserves to be heard, including yours. If this video spoke to you, or if you want to hear more real, raw, human stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps them reach the people who need them most. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, you don't have to wait for permission to start rewriting your story.